Okay, well, what's the right answer? Should I use 7.96? Should I use 5.25? Should I use 6.11? Should I use 7.9? Well, let's just think a little bit about pluses and minuses here. Look, anytime you use more observations, which we're going to get the most observations here, it's nice because any one observation, especially when you're doing like arithmetic average, like those outliers will not necessarily impact the overall average that much. So there's more information content when you take more observations. You might argue that recent is more effective. Maybe we only want to look at the current economic reality or the most recent economic reality, maybe the last 10, 15 years. That's a plus to that. The problem is if you only use 10 years, any 1 year can really be having a huge impact on the arithmetic average especially. 50 years might be somewhere in between. Okay, what about geometric? Well, geometric might be better because this is the way investors tend to earn returns over time. Although arithmetic average is actually your best guess at the next equity market risk premium you're going to observe. So the question is, boy, there's a lot of different ways to think about this. Should I use bills versus bonds? Well, there's pluses and minuses there as well. What I would say is the one you want to use is the one that you're going to experience during the life of the project or the valuation that you're going to perform. So which one is that? I'm going to give you a very unsatisfying answer. We don't know. This is just giving us a basis to make an estimate about the future equity market risk premium. Look, there's not necessarily a right answer. I mean, again, today we're going to spend some time. We're talking about, what is the equity market risk? What's the best way to get it? What goes into it? What do surveys look like? What's the historical look like? Things like that. But the reality is, to get the right, quote unquote, right one, we'll only know that in hindsight, right? So we'll talk a lot about it, but then we'll use it. But we'll also understand that, look, we just don't know necessarily. We have to base it on our best guess as we sit here today, knowing that we're probably going to be wrong. Okay. Another way you could go about this risk premium is you could suppose the market's fairly priced and compute an internal rate of return and then subtract the riskless or the risk-free rate. We'll get the implied risk premium. So what do we need for this? We need the current market level, current corporate payout rate, and earnings forecast from analysts. So this is a bit of an older one, but it's really just for an example. So I have the S&P 500 at 1488. That's like the current value. And then I have the earnings at 375. S&P was, earnings is 75. So I had I think that's actually let's see here. So analysts are forecasting a 6% growth rate, excuse me. Oh, so this is the current earnings, and that's going to grow at 6%. So think of this as like time 0 earnings, and then this will grow time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4, time 5. And then I'm going to assume at this point earnings will match the economic growth rate of 4.7%. So the overall, say, GDP growth rate, if you will. Again, maybe a bit optimistic. And it turns out in hindsight, it's been more like, probably 2 to 3%. But you grow that out, then you do 1 plus G over R minus G. But the R, notice, is not solved for. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what R would make all of this equal to 1418. And by the way, that's like solving for the internal rate of return, right? So if you do that, you'll end up with the expected return on stocks, or the R would be 8.86%. Then what you say is, well, the implied equity risk premium is expected to return on stocks the riskless rate, which was 4.7. By the way, a lot of times we'll use the risk-free rate as sort of a proxy for growth as well, so that's why it's matching. But if I now take this as 8.86% minus 4.7, I'll end up with 4.16% as my implied equity premium. Now, if I want to look at sort of some, a 50-year time frame, almost 60-year time frame, you'll notice that the implied equity market risk premium, again, moves around over time, right? Well, one issue with this implied equity market risk premium is I think you do see some sort of extremes here, right? So, like, for example, in 99, when we were, setting all-time records on the NASDAQ, and clearly there was a frenzy about tech stocks, as the implied equity market risk premium was significantly lower. Also, at the depths of the financial crisis, you'll see the implied equity market risk premium was really high. Also in the late 70s, when the markets were not doing that well, very high. So definitely influenced by market sentiment at any given point in time. So now let's look at what if I kind of said, why don't I look at historical equity risk premiums? So arithmetic average, geometric average, sort of a graph of what we've seen over time. Let's do that also combining the implied equity risk premium. What's interesting is how there used to be a lot of dispersion, shall we say, but it all seems to kind of be converging on, somewhere in this area here, somewhere from 4 to 6%, maybe like a 5%, midpoint, if you will. Again, just interesting to see that. So one of the things I wanted to I just want to make a point of before we move on is this is from the Demotter and equity risk premiums. You can get this at that particular link here. I just chose things from various pages in there. Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in learning more about this, you'll notice this up to page 98. It's over 100 pages, and it's really well done. And he updates this on a reasonable basis here. So what's the bottom line in equity risk premium? Well, researchers seem to indicate it's somewhere between 3.5% and 6%, concluding with a point estimate of about 5%. That's a recent study by Pratt and Grabowski. Ibbotson suggests a premium of about 5%. But always remember, using historical average premium to estimate the future premium assumes a stable premium over time. And I think one of the things that we've seen is that clearly is not necessarily the case. So we just have to keep that in mind. Maybe we think about it as 5% and realize that it's probably not exactly correct, but it's probably in the ballpark. Knowing that it's not that, we won't necessarily know if we're wrong. So at any rate, so it's something to think about. But I'm giving it more thought and talk today. I want you to recognize the uncertainty about this. But now that we've talked about it, we'll sort of move forward and we'll use certain equity risk premiums, knowing that it's always going to be a guesstimate and it's probably going to be wrong. International risk premiums, I think the main story we want to think about here is that, look, we use country ratings like Moody's, for example, could give us a country rating. Compared rated firms in a country to firms in the same rating in the U.S. would be another way to do it. We could add a default spread to the historical risk premium in the U.S. historical data as a proxy for how different the risk premium is. One way to look at this is, hey, look, I'm in a different country. Clearly they have a different risk premium than the United States. How do I take that into account? Well, maybe the adjustment might be to add a particular premium for this. So look, if I'm a country that's had more risk historically, maybe in Argentina, Belize, Moldova, Paraguay, the adjustment could be as high as over 5% to the premium. So again, let's just pretend it's 5%. My market risk premium in the U.S. based firm is 5. Well, this would imply maybe it's 10 or greater in these countries. Maybe other countries that have had similar risk profiles to the U.S., Austria, Canada, Denmark, maybe there wouldn't be any adjustment, or it would be very low, roughly 0. Some countries you actually might argue that it's got a lower risk still. So maybe Switzerland, for example. Maybe you could even make that argument about Germany in more recent years. So just things to think about, right? But there probably should be some kind of adjustment depending on the country that you're in. All right, so a lot of talk about risk premiums there. I'd like to just wrap up with a discussion about cost of debt next.